Okay, Andrew Baildon, welcome to the podcast, mate. How are you?
Thanks, Brett. No, really good, mate. Happy to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. Good to see you. Listen, look, you may not know this, but you were a huge influence on me as a young swimmer. You know, I watched you at the 1990 Commonwealth Games specifically. I can remember, and you were a superstar at that meet. But you were a sprinter, and there wasn't a lot of sprinters in Australia back in the late 80s and 90s. Sprinting wasn't really a thing, and you were the first of our kind. You know, so for me, you were the man. Did you know that about yourself at the time, like back then?
No, not really, but you are right. I mean, sprinting wasn't really, we weren't strong in sprinting in Australia. Obviously, we were in the 50s and 60s, but certainly not in the, in the 90s. And we were sort of, myself and Denis Cotterell were really sort of breaking new ground when it came to sprinting. And he had a really unique and interesting way of coaching. And, he was at the forefront of really what we were doing in Australia. But as trailblazers, we didn't really feel like that. It was just what we were doing. And I just wanted to get out there and perform and try and break new ground for the sport. I mean, in the latter part of my career, I was probably more aware of what we had done or what we were doing.
Yeah.
But it was just great that we were able to get out there and do something together. And it was very much a partnership with Denis and myself at that time.
Yeah, mate, you swam at the 88 Olympics, right?
Yeah.
And then that was the first time they had the 50 freestyle. So talk to me about that time, like, finding out that the 50 is going to be an event finally. And how do you, what's the mentality back then?
Yeah, well, I mean, I made my first team in 87. So I got to meet my hero, Matt Biondi and Tom Yeager at the Pan Pacific Games in 1987. Right. They were in Brisbane, and I was 15. So I made my first team at 15, so I was quite young. And I remember walking out with Matt. I qualified in lane 6. He was in lane 5, and I turned to him and said, "Good luck." And I was just excited to be able to talk to him. And then at the Olympic Games in 88, I qualified for the team, and then we went out to Boca Raton in Florida for a meet, and Matt was there, and he was in very, very heavy training at the time. And I was fresh. I'd just come off the Olympic trials, and I won the 50 and 100 free there. And it was really interesting that the different dynamic with the media. I was introduced as the guy that beat Matt Biondi, and the American media just simply wasn't interested in talking to me, which I thought was fantastic because they knew he was in hard training.
Yeah.
And I'd just come off the back of an Olympic trials, and, the Australian media went nuts about it, but I knew within myself, he was just off the back of swimming a 22 low and a 48 low and whatever he did at his trials. But then when we were at the Olympic Games, because I'd sort of formed this friendship with Matt, I remember he came up to me, after the heats, and he said, "Oh, how are you going?" And I said, "Matt, I think I finaled." And he's like, "That's awesome, Andrew." And, he was really genuinely excited that I'd finaled. And so, yeah, it was the first time that the world had come together in 88 after the 84 and 1980 boycotts. And so it was the first time the whole world had come together. And there was just this really amazing feeling. And, to get up there and to be a part of that first 50 freestyle was a pretty special moment, and to be there with my mentors and my idols was even more special as well.
Tell me this: what was sprinting back in '88? What were you trying to do? I know that you swam very head high. I know that. What was sprinting?
Oh, sprinting back then. I mean, we used to take 2 breaths for the 50. Now, I mean, some of the guys don't even breathe at all, or they're taking at least one. I mean, the pool was a lot longer. But we didn't have these launch pads to launch ourselves off. So no, I mean, it was. We were just discovering what it was like to sprint. I mean, there was not a lot of underwater work that went on. I mean, there was with backstroke. And looking back now, that's really something we should have explored more. Mm-hmm. And it was just about just getting in there and having a crack. And trying to work out, you know, what the best stroke rates were to maximise speed, and you know, we were just exploring new ground, particularly in the 50.
Yeah. What about in training? What was training like for the sprints back then?
Well, actually, funnily enough, Denis introduced I think we were probably really the first people to introduce harness work. And Denis used to make up these harnesses, and he always used to have to wear goggles when he was towing me, or wear glasses, because quite often the harnesses would break because we were just, you know, pioneering this sort of stuff, and he'd end up with all these welts all over his back and on his face. And and I can remember at the 1991 World Championships, we were doing a lot of harness work there, and it really sent a lot of people talking about what we were doing there. And I remember one of the senior coaches of the Australian team said to Denis, you know, when are you going to stop using that bloody rubber band? And now you see that, you know, harness work is, you know, forms a lot of what sprinters do and swimmers do now, both resistance and assisted harness.
Absolutely.
And that was really wonderful stuff that we were doing there. You know, groundbreaking things that Denis brought into the program for us.
Yeah. Were you doing much recovery back then? Was recovery a thing back then?
Yeah. Recovery was 2100s on the 120 or 115, and
yeah.
You know, it was an interesting time because, you know, when Don Talbot came into the team, I think in 1989 was his first team. He didn't really understand the concept of recovery, and that's where a lot of things sort of didn't go so well for Australian sprinting, and a lot of what we did, actually all of what we did, was based off Kieran Perkins. So my heart rate sessions went from 9 to 12 100s to 30 100s on the 130, and it just became about survival, really. And that was where Australian sprinting really took another hit. And it wasn't until Gennady Turetsky came in with Alex Popov into Australia in 1993 after his win in 92 at the Barcelona Olympics, where Gennady really stood up to Don and told him what really needed to be done with Australian sprinting. And then, you know, again, off we went. And, you know, then we did get our recovery sessions. And I remember being in a camp in I think it was Canberra, and Don and Gennady were having a screaming match on the side of the pool because Gennady said that we needed to recover. And he changed the whole session to just 3K recovery of whatever you want to do. And Don didn't like that because there was a predetermined session that had to be swum. And Gennady said, no, you know, these guys are spent. We're not going to get anything out of them. So it was probably then that there was a real shift again in Australian sprinting, where recovery really did form a part of what we were doing. Whereas prior to that, if we weren't meeting the set targets, you know, and the coaches were reporting to the head coach about the sets we were doing, you know, we were threatened with, you know, funding being taken away from these coaches and all sorts of things. So it became a pretty tough time. And there was a lot of friction amongst the coaches and the head coach, the sprint coaches at that time. I remember some of that stuff, but certainly a little bit earlier than me, and that was going on. It was a process, and I'm so glad Gennady came to Australia and Alex came to Australia. It really shifted things completely, because who knows where it probably just would have kept going the way it was going, but it would have buried a lot of sprinters. But it did bury a lot of sprinters. You know, there was a lot of heavily muscled guys like Darren Lang and you know, Angus Waddell, I remember, and myself, I kind of got through it. Chris Feidler probably coped with it a little bit more because he could put together a really good 200 free, but some of us really did struggle, and you know, there was a lot of shoulder injuries and all sorts of stuff during that time.
Tell me about this meet in Auckland, 1990 Commonwealth Games. For those that aren't familiar with Commonwealth Games as much as we are, it's a big meet. It can, if you're successful there, it can shoot you into stardom in Australia. And I get a feeling that's kind of what it did for you in 1990. You had this breakout in multiple gold medals in many different events, sprinting, freestyle, butterfly, and also relays. So did it change your life?
I suppose in many regards it did. You know, you'd walk down the street, you know, in my local community here on the Gold Coast, and you know, you would often be signing autographs for young kids and things, which was fantastic because the sport had a real profile back then. And there's been a shift now where probably a lot more towards professional sports here in Australia. I think as a sport, we really need to reinvent ourselves and, get our swimmers back out there because they are amazing athletes and amazing ambassadors for sport and for mental health and all sorts of stuff. But it is a big meet for Australians, and it was a wonderful opportunity for me to have my family there, and that they were there to watch it all. And there were some amazing times that I had on the Australian team, and then obviously eventually captaining the team, which was a real honour at the 1994 Commonwealth Games in Victoria, Canada. For us in Australia, there's probably 4 big meets. There's World Champs, Pan Pacs, Olympics, and Commonwealth Games. Yeah. And then obviously you've got World Short Course and all sorts of stuff beyond that. But it really was an amazing meet, to be there and to perform like that. And you don't often do that in your career where everything sort of comes together in one meet. And for me, it did. It was a wonderful experience to be a part of the team then. Yeah.
What about as you got older and as you went through? It was tough back then. There wasn't a lot of money in the sport. How were you surviving? How were you swimming at the highest level? Because you were in the top 20 in the world for about 10 years, I believe. So how did you manage that?
Well, I had really supportive parents. My father was very big on education. He said, your swimming career can be taken away from you, but an education can never be taken away. And I ended up, I was very fortunate that I was given the first sporting scholarship to Bond University, Australia's first private university here in Australia. And I stuck with it. It was tough. Sometimes I was doing, one subject per semester, and it was really tough when all my friends left and graduated and I was still there. But I got through that. I had a stint living away from home, and that was an absolute unmitigated disaster for me. I just had really supportive parents, and really in swimming, it's really tough to make it without supporting parents. And I just kept telling myself that, if I'm getting a $2,000 grant from the government, it's more than they got, back in the 60s and 70s. So I was just very lucky that I had a supportive family and I was able to get through to a point where, I hung up the togs and the goggles and, got on with my life.
Tell me about that. By the time you decided to hang it up, what are some of the lessons you learned through that period, you think? To be in the moment, I would say, and to really appreciate the gifts that you have and the experiences and the environment that you're in. I mean, you're amongst some of the most positive, amazing, capable people, and they're all doing a positive thing. And to be amongst that community and to harness, that moment. And if you're at an Olympic Games or a Pan Pacs or whatever it is, just be there in that and take it all in. And appreciate, what it is that you're experiencing, and that not a lot of people get to do that. And yes, you've got a gift, and yes, you've got a work ethic, but you're also very fortunate as well. And I think that's really important to take that away from your career. Yeah, absolutely. Tell me, do you have any funny stories of back then? Any stories on the Australian team? Any interesting things happen? You must have a couple.
Oh, look, you talk about how tough the sport can be, and things like that. So, I mean, probably one of the standouts for me is the 1988 Olympic trials. They were down in Manly in Sydney. And
oh, wow.
My parents had taken me down, and we had an apartment that we were staying in. And my parents wanted me to be with them so that they could cook for me and all sorts of stuff. And there's sort of 2 funny takeouts I had. There was a friend that we had down with us, and I was debating about whether I should shave for the meet or not. He just said to me, "Are you nuts? This is the Olympic trials." So I ended up shaving. I was only 16 at the time, so a little bit naive. But the biggest takeout from that was we found out that my coach, Dennis Cotterell, was hitchhiking down because he just didn't have any funding. He couldn't afford a flight down to Sydney.
Wow.
And then we also found out that he was sleeping rough in shop fronts overnight.
Wow.
As a homeless coach, really. And my parents were absolutely mortified that he was doing that, and he was still turning up to the session. He didn't say anything to anybody. And obviously, when my parents found out, we took him in into our apartment.
Wow.
And he refused to sleep in the bed. He slept on the floor. And because he felt like he was imposing somehow on us. I mean, this is my coach, like my brother.
Yeah.
And so we went through that meet together and made the team. And the funny thing is, I won the 50 and the 100 free and qualified in both for the team. And he didn't put his name down as a coach. And because he didn't have enough confidence in himself that he was going to be selected. And because he didn't put his name down, he didn't officially get selected, but they still took him away anyway, and he was there at the Olympic Games.
Wow.
That's just the way things were back then. He just very humble and unassuming person back then, and I was just obviously grateful that he was there at the Olympics with me.
This is Dennis Cotterell we're talking about, one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport now, coaching, very famous for coaching Grant Hackett, especially as well. Tell me about Dennis. Talk to me. What makes Dennis so great? What made him so great?
Dennis he's an eccentric. And he actually reminds me of Dean Boxall is very similar to Denis, actually,
right,
who coaches Ariane Titmus and Elijah Winnington and various other great swimmers. But they're the sort of coaches like Denis. It's just get out of their way and let them do their thing. Yeah, and that's obviously what Don Talbot didn't do, and why Denis and Don clashed a lot. And I if there is a regret, it would be that Denis was allowed to just get out there and do his thing. And the powers that be wouldn't allow that, until obviously Gennady came in, and then, Denis had a lot more success with Grant. But they were tough times back then. He was an amazing thinker. He was just the right fit for me. He didn't over engineer things in terms of the way he prepared you for a race. He was very calm, and that's what I liked. And he was very analytical as well. And in terms of understanding stroke, there's probably not a better stroke technician in the world. I would say have to be in the top three. He just gets stroke and really understands it. And he's married to the sport. And, not earning any money, he had to supplement his income. And I told you the story earlier about, he was just married to the sport. He doesn't have children, and his children were the athletes. He used to pick me up for training when I was young, and we used to not have a heated pool here on the Gold Coast. And so we used to have to drive 45 minutes down to an indoor heated pool in New South Wales. And he was preparing me for the 1987 Pan Pacific Games. We'd do a morning session, short course down in New South Wales, and then we do an afternoon session in a 15-metre heated resort pool. And I'd be on harness the whole time as a 15-year-old. And that's the way he prepared me for the 1987 Pan Pacific Games trials, because we didn't have any other facilities. So he had the ability to just adapt and make you feel like you were doing the work when you obviously weren't, and gave you the confidence to still get out there and perform. Yeah.
Denis is a good man. Love him. And the thing I love about Denis, he's always asking questions. He's inquisitive. Like he cares, and he's genuinely interested. And I love that. You get a guy who has been at the highest level, and he's asking the simplest person over here questions about themselves, and you're and really interested. And I always love that about Denis. I felt like he cared about me, and I had something to say. I don't know what it was, but I had something to say, and he cared about it, and that makes you feel.
Yeah, he does. and you know, I remember one time we were at I think it was the 1990 Commonwealth Games, and one of the competitors that I was competing against asked if they could borrow my harness, and he said absolutely, let them have the harness. And I lost lost it at Denis about, you know, helping someone else out who I've got to compete against. And he just came straight back to me and said, if you can't beat that guy at your best, then you shouldn't beat him. And I thought, okay, where do I go with that? So he was all for the sport, and you know, he's got great connections and great friendships all throughout the world.
Well, I'll tell you this, you and I overlapped a little bit. I'm not exactly sure how much, I can't remember, but I do know we went on a European tour together. We went to they used to have these meets out in Europe where I don't know what they called them, but it was like, we went to Finland. I know that.
It was like well, they call it World Cup or something.
Yeah,
like
World
that.
Cup, something like that. We did a World Cup together, and so I know we overlapped. So, you know, you probably don't know this, but you know, I looked up to you. You were the guy, and you had a lot of swagger, and like, you carried yourself as a sprinter. You know, sprinters carry themselves a certain way, and you certainly had swagger. You had experience, which was intimidating to me. You know, like, you'd just been there, done that. You'd done everything I wanted to do. So just being around you was intimidating. It was difficult, but I learned a lot from that experience. I learned a lot from watching you. I learned a lot from the way you carried yourself, the way you prepared yourself, the way you competed. The way you interacted with competitors. I watched and I studied you, and so I appreciate that. I just wanted to tell you that I thank you.
Mate, I didn't know that. That's really nice.
Yeah,
and I hope I was able to impart something positive onto you, and you know, and you were able to go on and be successful in your career.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I realized was that, look, if you have doubts about yourself, if you don't believe in yourself, you don't have a chance. Like, it's tough enough. When you do believe in yourself, it's already tough because you got other guys that believe in themselves. But if you don't, then you don't stand a chance. And I learned that from you, is like, you believed in yourself and you carried yourself like a winner, and you were there to compete. And I liked that, and I learned from that. And it was tough to take that on, because, you know, you have a lot of doubts about yourself, and I realized I didn't have the experience. So I think over time I took from you that, like, look, you got to believe in yourself, and you got to carry yourself a certain way as a sprinter. Otherwise you don't have a chance in hell. You know, I ended up racing guys like Alexander Popov and Gary Hall Jr. and the you know, legends, guys that kind of like, you know, your Matt Biondis, you know? And so, look, if you don't have any belief in yourself, you don't have any chance. So, so I certainly learned those things from you, and I appreciate that. But like, you also were dominant in Australia for many years, and so I wanted to be that guy over time, and that took a little while, but I finally got there. But in terms of you know, once you decided to hang it up, and then what you decided to do with your life beyond that, like, where did you've got some swim schools now, I believe. So how did you come up with that concept?
So for me, really, I didn't really finish my career the way that I wanted to, and I think quite often most swimmers or most athletes don't finish their careers the way that they would really want to on their own terms. I mean, my sister died of breast cancer in 1995. She was 31 years old, and she was my biggest fan. She would just go everywhere. And for me, when she died, I really lost that drive. I really lost that confidence. I really lost that edge. And for me, the desire to compete was kind of lost. And I remember going to the 1996 Olympic trials, and I just, you know, I trained really hard, and I was very, very fit, and when I raced, I just didn't have it anymore. Yeah. So that was a really tough time for me, losing her. But then, sort of, once I realised that it was probably time, and, you know, the night that the 2000 Olympics were coming up as well, and, you know, there was a bit of a desire to keep going, but you know, when my sister died, I just didn't have the heart to keep going. Yeah. So I met my wife, Karen, and we got together, and she's got swimming background as well, and you know, we just decided to start some swim schools, and 25 years later, we now have 5 of them, and wow. You know, we've got 3 gyms as well, and so life's good, and the sport's given me a lot. It's taught me a lot. You know, about you know, how to be resilient, and nothing comes easily. So the sport has given me so much more than I've given it. And now that I'm also on the board of Swimming Australia, so I'm wanting to give back to the sport as well, because it has been so kind to me, and I'm still involved in it, obviously, with the swim schools, and we're growing our businesses now. And it's just great to see we've got athletes that have made Australian teams that have come through our program as well, which is really exciting. We've got Elijah Winnington, who's going to be at the Olympic trials, and Cody Simpson as well, who we taught to swim.
Yep.
Is coming out as well, and so it's just great to see, the wheel turn and these athletes, coming and representing your country, and you've had some influence in some way, to their career. So it's very satisfying for me.
Mate, I can tell you, there's no Michael Clems, and there's no Eamon Sullivans and even Brett Hawkes without, Andrew Baildon. So you definitely had an influence on sprinting. I mean, look where it's gone from 2000 to where we are today. I mean, the number of sprinters we've had in the last 20 years at the highest level has just been remarkable. It's nice.
It is. And for us back in 1990, breaking 50 seconds in Australia was a really big deal. And it was something that we as sprinters, it was like the 4-minute barrier in running and athletics. And once one person does it, then everybody sees that it's possible. And I was fortunate enough to be the person that could break down that barrier for Australia.
Yeah.
And then we saw ourselves, we felt different about things, and we were able to build upon that. And then obviously, I referred to Gennady coming in and really helping set up the sprint program nationally. And then where we are now, we've got, some amazing sprinters, obviously won the last Olympic Games, and it'll be interesting to see, the Olympic Games this year and how the 100 free goes and the 50 free goes, because it's going to be an amazing event.
Yeah, can't wait either, mate. Tell me, you mentioned the being on the board of Australian Swimming. What does that actually mean? What do you do on the board of Australian Swimming?
It's a lot of hard work, and we don't get paid. No, it's a volunteer position, and again, it's for me. It's about giving back to the sport, and I'm just in there, and to my mind, I just want to be in there and make the sport better. So when I leave and finish my time on the board, I want to make sure that the sport is in a better place. I want to make sure that particularly the athletes and the coaches are looked after, and they feel appreciated. And I also, for me, I want to make sure that our sport is growing again, because the professional sports in Australia are really taking over. They're a real powerhouse here. And the Olympic sports particularly are struggling for funding and things like that. And I want to turn that around and get things back to where they should be.
Yeah, mate, there was a moment in the lead up to Sydney, and we can see that beautiful thing in the background, the torch. That's what I was beautiful torch, the Sydney Olympic torch back there. There's a time around Sydney where swimming was booming, like everyone was a superstar, and we were doing really well as a team. It seemed we've lost a little bit of that. How do we get that back? Being on the board of Australian Swimming, do you guys talk about that?
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. I mean, it was definitely a golden era around the Olympic Games. And, we had that amazing moment between probably 99 to about 2008, where we were just an absolute powerhouse.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of talent, and we've still got that talent. But we need to just be better at being on the front foot with our sport. Our branding can be better. We need to look at sponsors that are looking at pushing the sport and promoting it, which is really important. Back in the day when we were swimming, Brett, we had companies like Uncle Toby's and Telstra that were, we were in cereal boxes and things like that. So we really need to get that back and get the profile of the sport. I mean, signing with Amazon Prime has been absolutely wonderful for us. The streaming service and that's really the sexy thing to be in now is in streaming, and we're very excited with that announcement. And we've got a lot of support. The athletes continue to be supported through Gina Reinhart, which is obviously extremely appreciated. She's very, very generous to the sport and to the athletes. but it's really around that branding piece and pushing the sport forward that we need to get better at. And, you know, the ISL is very important because that's lifting the profile of the sport. We're delivering the sport in a very different way now. And we just need to get better at making the sport more exciting and more interesting for the consumer.
Yeah, you talked about that professionalism, and a lot of other sports are going very professional. It seems like swimming is lagging a little bit. But in terms of the ISL, is Australian Swimming or Swimming Australia supportive of that, or are they looking to do their own thing? And are we going to see an Australian ISL team soon?
Yeah, so the answer to that is all yes. You know, we're obviously supportive of whatever makes the sport more exciting and more interesting. I mean, I'd love to see a national competition packaged together similarly like the ISL.
Yeah, me too.
And then, you know, then you leverage off that into the ISL and then with an Australian team. So yeah, there's definitely discussions around all of that at this stage. It's just a matter of the deliverables and whether we can deliver that and win. Obviously, COVID's had a lot to do with holding a lot of things back. I mean, particularly into the Olympic Games. But, you know, we're definitely looking forward. We're not looking backwards. And, you know, these are the sorts of things that we know that we need to bring into our sport to make it more interesting and more consumable.
Yeah. You also mentioned someone that we both have a relationship with, Cody Simpson. It's exciting, you know, someone like him coming into the sport with his profile and, you know, being a superstar in a different field. But that's a good thing for Swimming Australia, right?
Yeah, look, it's funny. I had this discussion just the other day where I was down at the New South Wales Open Championships and I was discussing with a couple of the other parents around this and around Cody and you know, I was conveying to them just about, you know, simply how good is this for the support. It's just for the sport. It's going to bring more eyes into the sport. You know, as I said, we're going to be streaming on Amazon Prime. Cody's got an international profile, so it's going to bring more eyes internationally onto our sport as well. So it can only be a good thing. And look, he's swimming really well.
Yeah,
you know,
he's getting better. I'm telling you.
Yeah, he is, and he's a wonderful talent. And we just hope we can get him out to this country and see him perform. There also with the best that we have, the best talent we have in our country.
Yeah, he's going to be positive. It's going to be tough for some of the swimmers though, because I'll tell you this: he's a magnet. He's a good-looking kid. He's starting to swim fast. He's passionate about the sport. He's an ambassador for the sport. Look, he'll help everybody around him, but he's a magnet, and everyone's going to be looking at him. Sponsors are going to be coming at him, and you know, as a swimmer, they're going to feel like he's grabbing a lot of the attention. So that'll be interesting to see how we manage that and how Swimming Australia manages that and how he manages it. But I know that, look, he's an advocate for swimmers, and he's going to be their best friend. So it'll be exciting. I can't wait to see it unfold.
Yeah, look, I think Cody's going to be generous with his profile and with the other athletes. I think he's probably going to be conscious of that. I mean, there might be some petty jealousies in there somewhere, but look, you know, at the end of the day, what's good for the sport is good for the sport, right?
Yeah.
And having Cody come in and be a part of that journey with us is only a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next? What's the next few months look like for you, mate?
Look, hey, it's tough in Australia at the moment. I mean, we don't have a lot of travel here. We're only traveling domestically, and getting staff for our businesses is really difficult at the moment because there's not a lot of international visitors. Well, there's none really. So it's going to be interesting. The economy is going to be interesting because we are slowly rolling out this vaccine. And we're doing it slower really than the rest of the world. And my concern is that the rest of the world will open up and we'll be left lagging behind with our borders still shut. So that's a wait and watch scenario with our businesses. And then in terms of the sport, we're just getting ready for Olympic trials. They're going to be down in Adelaide. And at this stage, the borders are open and we're all going to be able to be there. We've got contingency plans in place if something happens, but we are looking good. The athletes, you know, they're swimming really well. I mean, at the New South Wales State Open just the other day, I mean, Emma McKeon and Elijah Winnington were real standouts. They really swam well. My God, they're really on fire. I just hope that momentum continues. And, you know, our head coach, Rowan, he's doing a great job getting them prepared for anything and everything. So, I think it's exciting, and hopefully, the world comes together and the world sport performs at the Olympic Games, and there's some really exciting stuff coming.
Yeah. Is Swimming Australia pretty confident that Tokyo is going to happen for sure?
Yeah, we're fairly confident. And I think, Japan and Tokyo, I think, are very determined to make it go ahead. Obviously, there's not going to be international spectators, and that's going to be an adjustment for a lot of the athletes and a lot of their families. It's a shame. But I think the show must go on.
Yeah.
And a lot of other sports have shown that they can do it, through Formula One and the AFL and the tennis and things like that. So it can be done. It just needs to be managed. And we just need to make sure that our athletes have the mental outlook and the mental, determination and the focus to make sure that they can perform under these difficult circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you? You got any kids that swim?
Yeah, I've got my son. He's 20. Just swam a PB the other day. It's been quite a long time since he's swum a PB. He's had glandular fever and a lot of shoulder issues. So it's tough being a parent. And you sort of wish it was you, but no, his journey's going well, and he's studying at university. So he's trying to qualify for the Olympic trials at the moment. If he can do that, that'll be wonderful. And then the world is his oyster from that moment.
Is he a sprinter like Dad?
Yeah, he's a sprinter. He loves sprinting. He doesn't want to do nothing more than 2 laps.
I love it. He's a smart man.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listen, mate, I appreciate your time. Great catching up. Thanks for sharing some of your stories, your life story especially. And I didn't know that about your sister, so that was very touching. So I appreciate you digging into all that. Thanks a lot, Andrew.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, mate. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.